Hey, fellow comic book geeks, Kevin Given with you once again. If you love comics as much as I do, you're going to subscribe to my channel. I review comics for Comic Crusaders. I also have my own franchises, Adolescent Radioactive Samurai Platypi and Carl Vincent Vampire Hunter. They're available on Comics Central, Indie Planet, and Comixology. Check them out. Stay tuned to this broadcast for more information. Also, like the Facebook pages for each franchise for more information. Check out my Patreon site for some neat original artwork and shows that you won't find on YouTube. This week on Comics Let's Talk, we're going to discuss movies with a female lead that's based on comic books. A little bit of a history of it. I also want to discuss the Hollywood political agenda of identity politics, the woke movement, SJWs, whatever you want to call it, and what it means for entertainment and what it's done to our beloved franchises. All of this in anticipation of the upcoming Captain Marvel movie starring Brie Larson. She's getting a lot of flack for supposedly using this role to push gender politics. Is this movie pushing a political agenda in the guise of entertainment? Is Brie Larson good for the role and good for Marvel? What will this mean for the future of Marvel-based movies, since a lot of actors are rumored to be hanging up their tights, including Chris Evans and maybe Robert Downey Jr. And I'm not real sure about the latter. I've heard Chris Evans himself state that he's moving on from the role of Captain America, but I haven't heard anything official from the Robert Downey Jr. camp. However, we can take a hint from the trailer from Spider-Man Far From Home. Downey's not in it, but Samuel L. Jackson's Nick Fury is. It looks like he's the new mentor for Peter Parker. Anyway, true believers, we'll discuss all of that in just a few minutes. But first, let's look at a history of female leads in comic book-based movies. One of the myths that's being perpetrated is that there have been no good roles for females or strong female leads in movies or TV until recently. So, why haven't they been making movies with strong female leads until Wonder Woman? Well, the truth is that they've been trying since 1968. So why don't we know about any of it? Well, let's start from the beginning. That year, we saw Jane Fonda take on the role of the French comic book heroine, Barbarella. Today, Barbarella's exploits are being told by Dynamite Comics if you're interested in learning more about the character. And as always, we'll look at some Wikipedia today when we discuss these films. Barbarella is a 1968 science fiction film directed by Roger Vadim, based on the comic series of the same name by Jean-Claude Forest. The film stars Jane Fonda as Barbarella, a space traveler and representative of the United Earth government, sent to find scientist Durand Durand. That name sound familiar? Well, if you know 80s rock, then you'll probably know that name. And he has created a weapon that could destroy humanity. As a director who expressed an interest in comics and science fiction, Vadim was hired to direct Barbarella after producer Dino De Laurentiis purchased the film rights to the comic series. Vadim attempted to cast several actors in the title role, including Vernal Lisa, Brigitte Bardot, and Sophia Loren. He wound up choosing his then-wife, Jane Fonda. A friend of Vadim's, Terry Southern, wrote the initial screenplay, which changed considerably during filming and led to 7 other writers credited in the final release, including Vadim and Forrest. The film began shooting immediately following the completion of another De Laurentiis comic book adaptation, Danger Diabolique, with both films sharing several cast and crew members. The film was particularly popular in the United Kingdom, where it was the year's second highest grossing film. Contemporary film critics praised Barbarella's visuals and cinematography, but found its storyline weak after the first few scenes. Although several attempts at sequels, remakes, and other adaptations have been planned, none have yet entered production. According to the Los Angeles Times, Barbarella may seem quaint to modern audiences, but its imagery has echoed for years in pop culture. Lisa Eisner of the New York Times called Barbarella the most iconic sex goddess of the 60s. The film's costumes influenced Jean-Paul Gaultier's designs in The Fifth Element, and the Gaultier noted Paco Rabanne's metallic dress that was worn by Fonda. Barbarella was later called a cult film. Author Jerry Lemke noted the film's popularity. It was available in small video stores and was familiar beyond the film buff community. According to Lemke, any doubt about its cult status was dispelled when Entertainment Weekly ranked it at number 40 on its list of top 50 cult movies. In 2003, he cited the film's popularity on the internet, with fan sites ranging from a Barbarella festival in Sweden to memorabilia sales and reviews. Lemke writes that the websites focus on the character of Barbarella. Barbarella has influenced popular music, with Duran Duran taking its name from the film's antagonist. The group later released a concert film, Arena, An Absurd Notion, with Milo O'Shea reprising his role from Barbarella. Ariana Grande's 2014 music video for Break Free was also influenced by Barbarella. We don't get another female lead based on a comic book until 1984. In that year, we got two of them. First, it was Supergirl. Long before Melissa Benoist took flight as the last daughter of Krypton, Helen Slater donned the cape and boots to fight the evil Selina, played by Faye Dunaway. After Christopher Reeve had reservations about playing the Man of Steel again as the third movie in the franchise underperformed and was beat up by the critics, the producers, Alexander and Ilya Salkin, decided to focus on Kal-El's cousin, Kara Zor-El. I don't know what they were thinking, but this movie had such a weak script that it was destined to flop. It almost plays like two totally different films. In the first half, Kara is sent to Earth to retrieve the Omega Hedron, which is this film's MacGuffin. It's a device used to power Argo City, which survived the destruction of Krypton. But once she gets to Earth, she enrolls in high school, and the film changes pace and becomes a teen comedy rather than a superhero movie. And it's not even that interesting of one. I found the performances fine. Christopher Reeve was supposed to have a cameo, but he must have read the script and opted out. Then Supergirl, aka Linda Danvers, develops a crush on a boy, and Selina wants the boy for herself. So instead of this vital device for the continuing survival of Argo City, the two ladies fight over a boy. Some of the effects do hold up by today's standards, but some don't. It's an uneven mess. Directed by Jeanette Swar. Mark McClure as Jimmy Olsen is the only actor from the Superman movies to appear in this film. Supergirl earned extremely negative reviews. The film currently holds a 10% rating on Rotten Tomatoes based on 29 reviews, with the consensus: the effects are cheesy and Supergirl's wide-eyed cherry heroine simply isn't interesting to watch for an hour and a half. The film was nominated for 2 Razzie Awards, including Worst Actor for Peter O'Toole and Worst Actress for Faye Dunaway. Variety referred to the film as intermittently enjoyable spectacle. Some well-staged effects highlights, notably a violent storm that threatens the school, and the climax where Supergirl and Selina confront each other in the latter's mountaintop castle. Also in 1984 came Sheena, Queen of the Jungle. The first female lead in a comic book wasn't Wonder Woman. However, Wonder Woman is one of the few that survived consistently into the present day. Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, is a fictional American comic book jungle girl heroine. Originally published primarily by Fiction House, she was the first female comic book character with her own title, with her 1938 premiere preceding Wonder Woman #1, cover dated December 1941. Sheena inspired a wealth of similar comic book jungle queens. She was predated in literature by Rima, the Jungle Girl, introduced in the 1904 William Henry Hudson novel Green Mansions. So even at the beginning of the 1900s, you had strong female leads in literature, which included comic books. None of this is new, contrary to what you might hear in today's media. Sheena was an orphan who grew up in the jungle, learning how to survive and thrive there. She possesses the ability to communicate with wild animals and is proficient in fighting with knives, spears, bows, and makeshift weapons. Her adventures mostly involve encounters with slave traders, white hunters, native Africans, and wild animals. You know, there was 2 television series based on Sheena. Model Irish McCullough portrayed Sheena in a 26-episode TV series aired in first-run syndication from 1955 to 1956. McCullough told a newspaper interviewer she was discovered by Nassau Studios while throwing his bamboo spear on a Malibu, California beach, famously adding, "I couldn't act, but I could swing through the trees." Although the Sheena character was often called the Queen of the Congo, the TV series clearly located her in Kenya, which is hundreds of miles from the Congo River. Sheena was revived by TV syndicator Hearst Entertainment in October 2000. Portrayed by Gina Lee Nolan, Sheena was given a new power in this 35-episode Columbia TriStar series: the ability to adopt the form of any warm-blooded animal once she gazed into its eyes. She was also depicted as a ferocious killer, capable of becoming a humanoid creature called the Darak Na. This form killed numerous individuals, though in her regular form she was also seen in numerous episodes stabbing soldiers and other villains to death. As with Tanya Roberts, Nolan's Sheena spoke whole sentences. According to Deadline, Millennium Films are developing a Sheena reboot. But in 1984, the same year as Supergirl, Sheena, also known as Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, a fantasy adventure film based on the comic book character that first appeared in the late 1930s. A hybrid of action, adventure, and soap opera-style drama, Tanya Roberts' Sheena was shot on location in Kenya. It tells the tale of a female version of Tarzan, who was raised in the fictional African country of Tigora by the equally fictional tribe of Zambuli. The movie starred Tanya Roberts, Ted Wass, and Trevor Thomas. It was directed by John Gillerman and written by Lorenzo Simple Jr., who had previously collaborated on the 1976 remake of King Kong. Released by Columbia Pictures on August 17, 1984, Sheena bombed in theaters and was nominated for 5 Golden Raspberry Awards, including Worst Picture, Worst Actress for Tanya Roberts, and Worst Director, Worst Screenplay, and Worst Musical Score. But it reportedly did find some cult success on home video and DVD. The following year, Sylvester Stallone's then-girlfriend, Brigitte Nielsen, picked up the sword and played the female lead of Red Sonja. In 2016, there was a motion comic version of the character created by Shout Factory and available on YouTube for anyone interested. And even though Arnold Schwarzenegger is in this film, for some reason he couldn't play Conan, even though the story is in the same universe and produced by the same people. This film was directed by Richard Fleischer, and the film introduces Brigitte Nielsen as the title character, with Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sandal Bergman, Ronald Lacey, Ernie Reyes Jr., Paul L. Smith, and Pat Roach in supporting roles. The film features the sword-wielding Marvel Comics character Red Sonja, created by Roy Thomas, who first appeared in Marvel's Conan the Barbarian series in 1973. The film's character of Red Sonja was based on Red Sonja of Ragatino, a character created by Robert E. Howard, appearing in his short story The Shadow of the Vulture. The film acknowledges that it was based on the character created by Robert E. Howard in the introductory credits. As in Howard's stories of Conan, the film takes place in the Hyborian Age, a fictional prehistoric time that had been depicted previously in the films Conan the Barbarian and Conan the Destroyer. And we had to wait another 10 years before we got another female lead superhero based on a comic book. It's 1995's Tank Girl, American science fiction film directed by Rachel Talalay, based on the British poet apocalyptic comic series of the same name by Alan Martin and Jamie Hewlett that was originally published in Deadline magazine. The film stars Lori Petty, Naomi Watts, Ice-T, and Malcolm McDowell. Tank Girl is set in a drought-ravaged Australia, years after a catastrophic impact event. It follows the anti-hero, Tank Girl, as she, Jet Girl, and genetically modified super soldiers called the Rippers fight water and power, an oppressive corporation led by Kesley. After reading an issue of the Tank Girl comic book she had received as a gift, Talalay obtained permission from Deadline's publisher, Thomas Sowell, to direct a film adaptation. She selected Catherine Hardwood to be the production designer and worked closely with Martin and Hewlett during the making of the film. Tank Girl was filmed primarily in White Sands, New Mexico, and Tucson, Arizona. The film's critically praised soundtrack was assembled by Courtney Love, and the Rippers' makeup and prosthetics team was headed by Stan Winston. Winston's studio wanted to work on the project so much that they cut their usual prices in half to meet the film's budget. It tanked. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Anyway, the following year we had a low-budget Barbarella movie. And Barbarella is a 1996 American film which was part of the Roger Corman Presents series. It was based on the Barbarella comic book. It was directed by Jim Wynorski, who in 2013 said it was the one film of his he regretted making. I can look back on it today and just say, oh well. But back when the memories were fresh and the blood on the floor was yet to dry, it was painful to even edit, he said. What went wrong? Wrong choice with a star, massive union problems in Vegas, studio interference, theft, accidents, 112-degree heat, you name it, we had it happen. But, he says, at least I got to see Soupy Sales perform. Jim Wynorski later called the film a mess, a film I cannot watch. Everything went wrong. Everything! His main concern was the casting of Talissa Soto. Wynorski said, she's very pretty and sexy, but she's not Barbarella. They forced me to use her. She just didn't have the body for the costume. I should have had Julie Strain, but they didn't think Julie Strain meant anything, so they put somebody wrong in the role. Wynorski later said he should have stopped and said, let's not do this, but at least I was going to lose the rights in 6 months, so I did what I had to do. But I got the film made, although I should have said no. It would have been so simple to cast the latest Baywatch bimbo in this part, said Girani. So now she's a vampire Wonder Woman from outer space with a Puerto Rican accent. What more could you ask for? And the director thought Roger Daltrey was great. The actors were fine. Filming took place in Las Vegas. It was 110 every day, said Wynorski. Everybody was gambling. Everybody was up all night. Everyone was blurry-eyed. There was a thief on set who was stealing money. It was awful. When you see how lousy those bat transformations are, said Girani, you'll realize that we're just a hip little $1 million drive-in movie. It was really a nasty, nasty picture to work on, said Wynorski. And it came out badly, too. I wish I could go back now and redo it with the CGI CGI of today, but even then, I just don't ever feel like going back to that. It's got a good Joel Goldsmith score. Given how absurd anything called Barbarella would be, the movie certainly doesn't insult your intelligence, said Girani. I think there's a nice emotional depth to the piece. And the same year, the equally cheesy, although more expensive, Barbed Wire, which is a 1996 American science fiction action film based on the Dark Horse comic book series of the same name. It stars Pamela Anderson in the titular role, alongside Tamura Morrison, Victoria Rowell, Xander Berkeley, Udo Kier, and Steve Railsback. Brad Wyman produced and David Hogan directed from a screenplay by Chuck Ferrer and Eileen Chaikin. The film was critically panned upon release and was nominated for several Golden Raspberry Awards, including Worst New Star, Worst Actress for Anderson, as well as Worst Picture, Worst Screenplay, and Worst Original Song. Barbed Wire generally received negative reactions by critics and was a box office bomb. It holds a 28% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes based on 36 reviews, 10 positive, 26 negative, with the consensus stating that Barbed Wire could have been fun camp, but Pamela Anderson can't deliver her lines with any dramatic or comedic impact. Roger Ebert pointed out that the film's plot was identical to that of Casablanca and derided the lowbrow attempt at sensuality, but praised the cast and crew's approach to the material. The filmmakers must have known they were not making a good movie, but they didn't use that as an excuse to be boring and lazy. Barbed Wire has a high energy level and a sense of deranged fun. He gave it 2.5 stars. Similarly to Ebert, Owen Gleiberman of Entertainment Weekly commented on the film's aping of the Casablanca plot and its teasing hollow naughtiness, but further said the film is lacking in energy. He gave it a C. And we jump ahead to about 8 years. Catwoman came out in 2004, an American superhero film very loosely based on the DC Comics character of the same name, directed by Pete Off and written by John Rogers, John Brancato, and Michael Ferris, with music by Claus Bedell. The film stars Halle Berry in the title role, Benjamin Bratt, Lambert Wilson, Francis Conroy, Alex Borstein, and Sharon Stone. The film centers on Patience Phillips, a meek designer who discovers a dark conspiracy within the cosmetics company she works for that involves a dangerous product which could cause widespread health problems. After being discovered and murdered by the conspirators, she is revived by Egyptian cats that grant her superhuman cat-like abilities, allowing her to become the crime-fighting superhero Catwoman, while also falling in love with a police detective who pursues her. Produced by Village Roadshow Pictures and Denise Denovi Pictures, Catwoman was released theatrically on July 23, 2004 by Warner Brothers. It was a critical and commercial failure, grossing $82 million against a budget of $100 million. The film received 7 Golden Raspberry Award nominations and won in the categories of Worst Picture, Worst Actress, Worst Director, and Worst Screenplay. Many critics consider it to be one of the worst films of all time. Catwoman earned a gross of $40,202,379 in North America and $41,900,000 in other territories for a worldwide total of $82,102,379 against a production budget of $100 million. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film has an approval rating of 9% based on 195 reviews with an average rating of 3.110. The site's critical consensus reads, Halle Berry is the lone bright spot, but even she can't save this laughable action thriller. On Metacritic, the film has a score of 27 out of 100 based on 35 critics, indicating generally unfavorable reviews. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of B on an A+ to F scale. The following year, we get Elektra, which is a 2005 Canadian-American action film directed by Rob Bowman, and it's a spin-off from the 2003 film Daredevil, starring the Marvel Comics character Elektra Natchios, portrayed by Jennifer Garner. The story follows Elektra, an assassin who must protect a man and his prodigy daughter from another assassin who is hired by the Hand. For the screenplay, Zach Penn, Stuart Zickerman, and Raven Metzner received written by credits. Filming started around May 2004 in Vancouver. The film was released on January 14, 2005. Upon its release, Elektra was a commercial and critical failure, grossing $56 million against a production budget of $43 million. It received negative reviews from critics who found the script and storyline lacking, but many praised Garner's acting as well as the action sequences. In its opening weekend, it ranked 5th. In its second weekend, it dropped by 69%. Domestically, the total gross was $24,409,722. At the time, the lowest for a film featuring a Marvel Comics character since Howard the Duck. The film had a worldwide total of $56,681,566. The film received largely negative reviews from critics. Based on 163 reviews collected by Rotten Tomatoes, the film has a 10% approval rating. The site's critical consensus reads, Jennifer Garner inhabits her role with earnest gusto, but Electra's tone-deaf script is too serious and bereft of intelligent dialogue to provide engaging thrills. On Metacritic, the film has a score of 34 out of 100 based on 35 critics, indicating generally unfavorable reviews. Audiences surveyed by CinemaScore give the film a grade B on a scale of A to F. And now we jump ahead to 2017 and Wonder Woman. So we saw all of those female-led superhero movies get bad reviews and were pretty much generally badly made. But Wonder Woman was the first movie based on a female comic book character to succeed at the box office. Now, before we get to the discussion of identity politics and woke and SJW, we should mention that this isn't the first action film with a female lead to succeed. Other films that have been adapted into comic book format with a strong female lead included Angelina Jolie in her first Tomb Raider movie back in 2001, which was successful enough to warrant a sequel, but the sequel tanked. Then there was the Alien and Terminator franchises going all the way back to the 80s, featuring Sigourney Weaver and Linda Hamilton, respectively. They've been adapted into comic book format at one time or another as well. So we have female lead movies that succeeded, which weren't based on comic books, but Wonder Woman was the first one that was actually based on a comic book that succeeded both commercially and critically. Now I want to address the idea that there weren't any strong female lead role models on TV. Growing up in the 70s brought us a lot of female leads. The first successful female lead on television came in 1974 with Angie Dickinson starring in Policewoman. The show is said to have inspired many young women at the time to join the police force. The 70s also gave us Charlie's Angels, which, admittedly, was more cheesy than serious drama, as the Angels were consistently scantily clad, but they were still tough, no-nonsense ladies that got the job done. On the superhero front, Wonder Woman with Linda Carter began in 1975, then The Bionic Woman premiered the following year. Now, what's interesting is that both shows debuted on ABC, then moved to different networks. In Wonder Woman's first season, we see the adventures of Diana Prince during World War II, and when the series moved to CBS, they brought the show into the present day. Lyle Waggoner still played Steve Trevor, but on CBS he played the character from the first season's son, so thankfully the romantic aspect of the relationship between the two, apparent in the first season, was downplayed, for obvious reasons. And then The Bionic Woman moved from ABC to NBC. Both shows were intensely popular, and neither was canceled due to bad ratings. Wonder Woman was canceled because Linda Carter's contract was up, and she opted not to renew. The Bionic Woman was canceled simply because The $6 Million Man was also canceled around the same time. Both shows garnered about the same number of episodes, right around 61 for Wonder Woman and 58 for The Bionic Woman. For a short time, Wonder Woman and The Incredible Hulk played back-to-back, which gave superhero fans of that day a DC title next to a Marvel title. So, there were successful, strong female leads that influenced generations of women. Fanboys, for the most part, have no problem with strong female leads. So when did the identity politics movement begin, and how has it affected our beloved franchises? Star Wars: The Force Awakens came out in 2015 and was a huge success. It's the highest-grossing film in North America, and the third highest-grossing film worldwide. I was so ecstatic to see the return of the franchise. Now, I'm not the kind of guy that will diss the prequels. I enjoyed the first one, despite Jar Jar Binks being prominent in that one, and the third one was clearly a step in the right direction toward the greatness of the original series. Attack of the Clones was probably, for me, the weakest of all of the Star Wars films. But Force Awakens had the right feel. It was so close to the magic of the first Star Wars that I felt like a kid again. The action was there, the special effects top-notch, the pacing was great, and J.J. Abrams helped craft an epic masterpiece. But something was wrong. The characters weren't quite right. The biggest letdown for me, of course, was the death of Han Solo. They killed off Harrison Ford's Han Solo without putting him in any action scenes with Luke or Leia, and that kind of fogged my view of the newer characters. But of the newer characters, my favorite was Finn, a stormtrooper that questioned his career choice. I couldn't get into Kylo Ren as a villain. He seemed more whiny than menacing. Unlike Darth Vader, who was a great villain. Also, Rey didn't seem right to me, like she was incomplete, more of a caricature than a person. So the way the characters were written, they weren't developed as strong as they should have been. And the critics are on board with the entire identity politics woke movement and SJW thing that's going on. They're obviously going to give every movie that is produced with the goal of pushing this political view, good reviews. The proof is in their review of DC Comics movies, which I will touch on in a minute. But first, the problem with Star Wars. When the weak creation of the new Star Wars characters was brought up, how did the producers respond? They said fanboys couldn't deal with a strong female lead and insulted the fan base. As I've just pointed out, I grew up with strong female leads throughout the 70s. The only one of the aforementioned shows that I didn't watch much of was A Policewoman. I didn't necessarily dislike the show, I just didn't get into it as much as the others. And I also loved the Alien and Terminator movies, which gave us strong, well-developed female leads. And so I welcomed the new cast of Star Wars, but noticed that something was wrong. First with Kylo Ren. How could someone be this big of an idiot and rise to prominence in the Empire? How was Rey able to fight Ren and get the upper hand? And the only answer that comes forward is that Rey is a woman and Ren is a white male. Really? Rey can do all things just because of her gender? We know so little about her, and she's too young to have learned how to do all the things that she does in this movie so great, including flying the Millennium Falcon and fighting one of the greatest leaders in the Empire just because she's female. Now, by contrast, Luke Skywalker had to study at Yoda's feet for quite some time. Then when he faced off against his adversary in a fit of rage, he not only lost the battle, he also lost his hand, and one suspects if he hadn't been Darth's son, he probably would have lost his life. Now that's character development over the course of the original 3 films. White men are also made to look like idiots in Force Awakens, and it's only simply because they're white men. Where does all this lead? The backlash. Where it leads is to a loss in box office revenue, with producers of major motion pictures calling fans names and disrespecting those of us that they need to pay for tickets to their movies. We come to The Last Jedi and the bad ideas that went into this film. At first, Last Jedi opened to boffo box office numbers similar to Force Awakens, and it was on its way to repeating the success of that movie. But in its second week, the audience dropped by 67% and wound up making over $300 million less domestically and $700 million less internationally than The Force Awakens. Again, Kylo Ren, this time along with General Hux, are the idiot white males that never should have risen above private in any military, let alone top-ranking officials of the Empire. And again, Rey can do anything just because of her gender. No character development of any kind. And again, the producers are calling us fans names because they can't deal with the fact that they gave us underdeveloped characters and situations and must blame us when we call them out on it. The Last Jedi was still the #1 film of the year and made a ton of money, though not as much as Force Awakens. And now we come to Solo. This is a good movie and deserved to make money, but because fans are upset, it way underperformed as a protest to the filmmakers who continue to undermine the traditional fans. As a result, we're simply not going to go to their movies until they get it right. How will Episode 9 fare? We'll find out soon. Now let's look at this gendered politics, woke stuff, this SJW stuff in other franchises. In 2015, we also got one of the weakest superhero movies of all time, Fantastic, which I knew would be a disaster. And instead of gender politics, we get race politics. Oh, you fanboys don't like this movie because of Michael B. Jordan is black. Well, what does that say for all the black people I know who grew up on Fantastic Four comics and didn't like this movie either? Josh Trank couldn't produce a successful adaptation of a comic book movie, even if it was characters that he created. I happen to like Michael B. Jordan a lot. He was good in Fruitvale, superb in Black Panther, and awesome in the Creed franchise. As someone who owned every Fantastic Four comic book from #1 well into the 300s before I stopped reading comics, and you can blame Jim Shooter for that, but that's a story for another show, so we won't discuss that here. I also read every Black Panther comic created in the 60s and 70s. I think I know both franchises pretty well. If a movie sucks, Fantastic, it will Trank. If a movie is great and sticks as well as possible to the source material, Black Panther, no matter the character's race or gender for that matter, it will succeed. Michael B. Jordan in both of those movies did not like Fantastic because it completely failed to live up to the Fantastic Four. Far worse than this Tim Story Fantastic Four, which I didn't mind too bad. But if a movie is great and sticks as well as possible to the source material, such as Black Panther, no matter the character's race or gender for that matter, it will succeed. Again, Michael B. Jordan was great in Black Panther. Michael B. Jordan did his best in Four Stick, but he was not the character of Johnny Storm. It was not because of his race. None of that cast, and again, the actors are not to blame, and I don't blame them, but no one in that cast was a right match for their characters. No one. But that's also a story for another show. So the box office numbers speak for themselves. Now listen up, social justice warriors. We don't dislike movies because of race or gender of characters. We dislike movies adapted from comics that fail to stick to the source material. Then in 2016, Paul Feig brought us his all-female Ghostbusters, and fans of the original films were upset. They had original cast members Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, and Ernie Hudson in their movie, while Harold Ramis had since passed on, so he could not reprise his role. But they didn't reprise their roles either from the original series, not to mention that their cameos were weak and had nothing to do with the story. When Leonard Nimoy reprised his role as Spock Prime in the Star Trek reboot for a cameo, it was an important part of that story to the film. In addition, Paul Feig completely ignored the original movies and started his series from scratch. Before the film was released, the trailer garnered the most unlikes in YouTube history. The film ultimately tanked, or should I say tranked. I'm going to say tranked from now on instead of tanked. The film ultimately tranked, with the producers and the cast accusing those they called haters of being misogynist and against women. Paul, you needed the original Ghostbusters fans to like your movie for it to succeed. Calling us names and accusing us of hating women is not going to get us to go to your movie. The irony is that this is not a bad movie. They just ticked off fans of the original franchise before its release. For some reason, Hollywood seems bent on pushing gender politics on its audience. It wants to show strong female leads, and that's fine with me, but it also wants to continue to undermine white males. It seems to have this agenda where it wants to belittle people of one gender and race, while building up people of another gender and other races. The big mystery to me is why? Why are these producers, for the most part white males themselves, bigoted against their own kind? But let's discuss that a little later. Right now, we'll look at another franchise, Star Trek. CBS began to promote its streaming service with the announcement of bringing us a new Star Trek series. This resulted in Star Trek Discovery. Star Trek fans were excited that Star Trek would return to television, especially since Star Trek Beyond underperformed, and the future of the Kelvin timeline was in doubt at the time, and it's since been scrapped. No more Kelvin timeline. But this series turned out to be the least watched of any Star Trek series, and like Last Jedi was for Star Wars fans, most divisive among Star Trek fans. I think the fans who like Discovery are the ones who aren't as big on the original series. Those of us who love the original series are the most upset with it. It's the darkest of all the Star Trek shows, and Sarek, though well played by James Frayne, is not behaving like the Sarek that fans of the original series all know and love. As of this writing, Spock has yet to be seen, though they're teasing us with his possible presence. Then we come to Doctor Who. Now, I'll be honest, I have not seen Doctor Who since Colin Baker played the character. I came on board in the Tom Baker era and loved it. Then the Doctor turned into Peter Davison. Then I kept watching. I wasn't as enthused about the show, but Davison was likable, if not a bit bland as the Doctor. However, he had a certain charm that made him a good Doctor. But when I first saw Colin Baker, I remember thinking, what the hell is this? And I stopped watching. I haven't been back since. However, that's not because I'm against the show, it's simply because of time limitations. I don't really have that much time for television right now, so I haven't seen any incarnations since Colin Baker. So I'm not going to judge or condemn it until I do. However, I can say that fans are also split on this franchise, just like with Star Wars and Star Trek. Viewership apparently has been cut in half, from about 10 million for the pilot at 6 million the last time I checked the ratings. Again, the critics want to praise everything, gender politics, and white male bashing. If you go to season 11 on Rotten Tomatoes, this season of Doctor Who has a 91% fresh rating from 38 critics, but look to the right at the audience score, and it's only at 21%. Quite a slant. Compare that to season 10, where the critics' score is still around 91%, but the audience score is a more respectable 69%. And again, I have no judgment on having seen it, and I will have nothing against a female doctor or a black doctor or even a black female doctor or a doctor of any race or gender for that matter. Just keep the spirit of the show and its source material, and I suspect they didn't do that given the audience of die-hard Doctor Who fans who weighed in. I'm also not a big fan of the Ocean's movie, so having only seen the first one and not really being much of a fan, I have nothing to say about the all-male or all-female casts of those movies, so I'm not going to discuss it here. Now back to the DCEU. I will admit up front that I'm more of a Marvel type of a guy than a DC type of a Hawkeye. But I do enjoy superhero movies from all shapes and sizes, and I generally like the DCEU movies. Man of Steel was good, but not great. It dragged in the middle and got a shellacking from critics. I've never disliked Henry Cavill, and I hope he continues as Superman, because someday they're going to get it right. They should never have put Zack Snyder on Superman movies. His movie barely performed better than the Bryan Singer, Brandon Routh Superman Returns. Snyder's dark tone would have been better suited to Batman, but not Superman. Speaking of Batman, we now come to Superman, Batman, Dawn of Justice, and the critics tore it apart too, except they praised Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman. Say what? Gadot was barely in that movie. I couldn't assess her performance on what she did in that movie. She just kind of fought the bad guy. So I reserved my judgment, which was ultimately positive, for the Wonder Woman solo movie, simply because the only thing she did was join in the battle at the end. There was nothing to gauge her performance on. So again, the critics seem to be positive to movies just because they have a female lead. Is this right? Of course not. Weigh the movie on its own merits, whether the lead is a male or a female. I enjoyed Wonder Woman, Justice League, and Aquaman all at about the same level. What did the critics do? According to Rotten Tomatoes, the critics gave Wonder Woman 93%, while the audience gave it 88%. And the box office numbers proved, which I already knew, that a female lead in a superhero movie could succeed at the box office. Then we come to Justice League, and again, the critics tore it apart with a 40% rotten score. However, audiences gave it 73%. And then the critics gave Aquaman 65%, which was barely passing, and yet Aquaman is the #1 DCEU movie and the only one to pass $1 billion worldwide. Audiences gave the movie a 78%. So it would appear that the critics are bending over backward to give female-led superhero movies more positive reviews. I personally enjoyed Aquaman the best, slightly better than the other two. It had the best developed characters, including the villains, and the cinematography was fantastic. The underwater kingdom rivaled that of Thor's Asgard in the MCU. Plus, the villain of Mars and Wonder Woman was only slightly better developed than Steppenwolf and Justice League. While all three movies had about the same amount of CGI, action, pacing, and direction, the audiences enjoyed all three movies within a 10% range. All three are good movies, so why did the critics like Wonder Woman the best? Just because she's a woman? The critical range between these three movies was 50% from Justice League to Wonder Woman, while the audience range was 10%. The audiences had a greater appreciation for all three films. And now we come to Captain Marvel. Now, I'm not going to judge a movie that I've never seen. Therefore, I obviously am not going to judge Captain Marvel at this stage, only to say that I did like the trailers. I was a huge fan of the Korean Skrulls growing up, and I can't wait to see them in a movie. Fanboys are already picking apart this movie before it's even being released as a film that pushes gender politics. Watch most creator-made shows on YouTube and you'll see a negative response. Is Brie Larson going to ruin the MCU with this movie? First, she stated during the Women in Film Crystal and Lucy Awards in effect that there are too many white male critics over 40 and criticized their critique of the movie A Wrinkle in Time. She goes on to say that film critics should reflect the diversity of American demographics and note that A Wrinkle in Time wasn't made for these old white dudes, as she calls them. Now, I'm not going to break down the film critic to movie watcher demographic. Suffice to say that there are no restrictions as to who can become a movie critic. An excellent response to Brie Larson is found on Dave Cullen's YouTube show. You can look that up for more information. Anyone is allowed to go into the profession if they so desire. Movie critics also give good reviews to movies that are well made, even to films that aren't made for them. So judging from this, yes, she is definitely steeped in gender politics and does not believe white men are capable of reviewing anything that doesn't appeal to white men, even though we've just seen that the majority of critics have given good reviews to these female-led gender political movies, and I'm going to bet you that the critics are going to give Captain Marvel a great review no matter what. And speaking of A Wrinkle in Time, it not only got panned by most critics, but the audience reviews, including the audience that the film was made for, gave it worse reviews than the critics. It is not a good movie by anyone's standards. It was simply made to push a political agenda which wasn't popular or with very many of the filmgoers. Brie seems to be a social justice warrior and is using her role as Captain Marvel to push her political views. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that the movie will be bad. However, we have seen that pushing political views in the guise of entertainment has led to decreased box office and viewership on television. Her views aren't necessarily going to be the driving force behind the movie either. This also doesn't necessarily mean that Marvel or Disney support her, but will her flaunting of political ideology hurt the box office of this movie? We'll find out soon. Alright, true believers, I'm Kevin Gibbons. That was a brief look at female-led movies adapted from comic books. If you love comics as much as I do, you're going to subscribe to my channel. I review comics for Comic Crusaders. I also have my own franchises, Adolescent Radioactive Samurai Platypi and Carl Vincent Vampire Hunter. They're available on Comics Central, Indie Planet, and Comixology. Check them out. Stay tuned to this broadcast for more information. Also, like the Facebook pages for each franchise for more information. Check out my Patreon site for some neat original artwork and shows that you won't find on YouTube. I hope you enjoyed the show. Click like if you did. Subscribe to my channel. Check out my Patreon site. Tune in next time when we can discuss another topic of interest to comic book fans. Until next time, this is Kevin Givens saying so long and keep reading those comics.